get in the cage!
Janet Mitchell didn't look up. The mop kept moving in slow, even strokes across the canvas skirt.
I said get in the cage!
Logan West's voice cracked off the walls of Pacific Arena like a whip. Behind him, 6 phones were already up, red lights blinking. She run the mop out over the bucket. Water hit the floor in a slow rhythm, drop by drop. You deaf? Or just slow? Neither, she said. Just working. Logan smiled at the camera before he smiled at her. It was the kind of smile that had ended careers in comment sections. Logan West had built almost as much of his reputation humiliating people online as knocking them out inside the ring. And the cameraman already knew exactly what shot he was chasing. Champion of the WBC middleweight division, he said, spreading his arms like he was announcing himself to a stadium instead of an empty gym at 9 in the morning, is asking a janitor to spar. For fun. That's generous, right? A few of his training partners laughed. Not because it was funny, because he expected them to. Janet set the mop against the wall, slow, deliberate. She turned and looked at him, really looked, the way you look at a storm cloud deciding whether it's worth the walk home. You'll regret this, she said quietly. And there was something underneath the words that made the room go still for half a second before the laughter swallowed it whole. None of them realized. They just challenged the wrong person. 3 years earlier, the name Janet Mitchell meant nothing to anyone inside Pacific Arena. She was 31 years old, 5'9", built lean, under a grey janitorial uniform, 2 sizes too big. Every morning before sunrise, she cleaned the arena, past the ring where champions trained under sponsor banners, past the wall of photographs where fighters posed with their arms raised and their names in gold lettering. Nobody photographed the woman who cleaned the blood off the canvas after they left. She kept her hair pulled back tight. She kept her eyes down. She wore a plain black hoodie under her uniform, even in the Vegas heat, sleeves pulled to her wrists. Because sleeves hid things, old scar tissue over the knuckles. A small tattoo on the inside of her left forearm that nobody had ever gotten close enough to read. Nobody noticed the way she moved. The way her feet never crossed when she walked, always stepping at an angle, weight low, like she was still bracing for something that might come from any direction. Nobody noticed that when a barbell rolled off a rack and nearly took out a fighter's ankle. Janet's hand shot out and caught it before her brain had even finished registering the sound. Nobody noticed. They would remember that later. The head trainer, a broad-shouldered man named Marcus Reyes who'd built Pacific Arena from a 2-ring gym into a WBC training pipeline, noticed one thing though. 2 months into her employment, he'd watched her stop mid-mop in front of the framed photo of a young female Golden Gloves champion from Detroit, a fighter who'd gone 34 bouts unbeaten, and then simply vanished from every record. Every headline, every rankings list, like she'd never existed at all. Janet had stared at that photo for 11 seconds. Then she'd kept mopping. Reyes never asked her about it, but he remembered. By the time Logan West's entourage rolled through the double doors that morning, 2 sparring partners, a nutritionist, a strength coach, and a cameraman who filmed his every breath for 3 million followers, Janet had already finished the corridor and started on the cage floor. Logan didn't own Pacific Arena on paper. He didn't need to. His face was on the banner outside. His highlight reel played on a loop above the treadmills. 26 wins, 0 losses, a title defense coming up in 6 weeks that half the sports networks were already calling a mismatch in his favor. He walked in already talking, the way he always did, narrating his own life for an audience that never stopped watching. "You believe this gym used to be nothing," he said to the boy. Camera. Sneakers tracking mud straight across the section Janet had just finished. "Now it's the best facility in Nevada, and it's got the best fighter in Nevada training in it." His eyes drifted sideways. Landed on her, kneeling near the cage door with a rag in her hand. And something in his face changed, the way a shark's does when the water shifts. "Hey," he said, pointing without looking at her, the way you pointed furniture. "You, mop girl." Janet didn't move. The gym had gone quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet, Right before something breaks, jump rope slowing, heavy bags settling, 30 pairs of eyes finding a reason to be anywhere else. Marcus Reyes stood near the front desk, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching the only person in the building who wasn't afraid. Logan crossed the floor toward her, pulling a glove off with his teeth, grinning for the camera like he already knew how this story would end. 10 minutes from now, every camera in that room would capture something no one would believe. Logan snapped his fingers twice, the way you'd call a dog that wasn't listening. "Bring me water." Janet stood, walked to the cooler bolted against the wall, and came back with a bottle. She held it out at arm's length. He took it, cracked the seal, and looked at the camera before he looked at her. He tipped the bottle over. Water hit the floor between them, spreading toward her boots, soaking into the laces. "Oops," he said. "Better clean that." Nobody in the gym moved. Marcus Reyes uncrossed his arms and took one step forward before catching himself. He'd seen Logan pull stunts before, pushing rookies into the deep end for content, humiliating a delivery driver who wandered in looking for a signature. This was worse, and everyone could feel it, but nobody had the rank to say so out loud. Janet knelt down. She wiped the water with slow, even strokes, the same rhythm she used every morning on the corridor floor. Her jaw stayed loose. Her shoulders stayed level. Only her hand betrayed her, fingers wrapping the rag so tight the knuckles went pale, tendons standing up along her forearm like cable under skin. Reyes was the only one who saw it. He filed it away and said nothing. Logan laughed and turned back to his crew, already narrating for the camera. "She knows her role," he said. "That's respect right there." By 9:30, he'd gone through both his sparring partners. The first, a cruiserweight named Diaz, with quick hands, lasted 30 seconds before a right hand put him on the canvas, legs folding like they'd simply stopped agreeing to hold him up. The second worked the clinch, tried to slow the pace. Logan answered with a body shot that doubled him over and left him gasping through his mouthguard. Logan paced the cage afterward, gloves still on, chest barely rising and falling. "That's it? Somebody give me a real round." Silence. The gym had 30 fighters in it, and not one volunteer. Men who'd sparred 5 rounds that morning suddenly found their shoelaces fascinating. Logan's eyes swept the room and stopped on Janet, coiling a hose near the back door. "You," he said. "Ever thrown a punch in your life, or you just swing a mop?" A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room, thin and forced. Janet didn't look up, once or twice. He repeated it for the camera, grinning. "Get in here. I'll even let you throw first." Reyes crossed the floor fast enough that his shoes squeaked against the mats. "Cole, she's staff." "Leave it. Relax, old man. I'm not gonna hurt her." Logan winked at the lens. "Much." Reyes turned to Janet. Whatever question was in his face, she answered it without a word. She set the hose down, rolled her shoulders once, and reached for the hem of her uniform. The gym went quiet in a different way now, not bored quiet. Something sharper. Underneath the grey fabric was a build that didn't belong to someone who spent her days pushing a mop bucket. Shoulders carved from years of specific, repeated work. A torso built for movement rather than mirrors. Along her ribs, a thin, pale line traveled from hip to sternum, the kind of scar that comes from something other than an accident. A retired cutman named Pete Alvarez, sitting on a folding chair near the water station, stood up so fast his chair skidded backward. He pushed his glasses onto his forehead and stared, mouth slightly open, saying nothing yet. Janet pulled on a pair of sparring gloves, testing the fit by flexing her fingers, an automatic motion practiced thousands of times. She looked at Logan, and for the first time since he'd walked in, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Only rule," she said, "don't cry when it's over." The words landed, and the room's temperature seemed to drop. Not opponents, not reporters, not even the commissioner who'd fined him. Nobody had spoken to Logan like that in 3 years of undefeated headlines. Certainly not a janitor. He bit down on his mouthpiece, and stepped through the cage door. Reyes laced Janet's gloves himself, working fast, eyes on her face rather than her hands. "You don't have to do this," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "I know. You haven't fought in..." Yeah. He stopped himself. Enid flexed her fingers inside the gloves. The leather creaked. "The cage hasn't changed." Reyes studied her for a long second, then nodded once and stepped back through the door, sealing it shut behind him. The latch clicked. Across the gym, phones were already rising. First 3, then a dozen, then every hand in the building. A bantamweight near the front row opened the live stream on his phone, angled it at the cage, and typed a caption before he'd even framed the shot. "Undefeated champion, about to spar the janitor." Inside the cage, Logan rolled his neck and threw 2 warm-up combinations at the air, loose and fast, muscle memory dressed up as intimidation. Janet stood in the opposite corner. She wasn't stretching, she wasn't bouncing. She stood with her weight low and her hands loose at her sides, tracking him the way you'd track a fuse, burning down towards something you already knew was coming. The bell rang. Logan came out with a jab, then another, feeling for range before he committed to anything bigger, testing, patient, the discipline of a man who hadn't lost 26 fights by rushing. Then he planted his back foot and threw the overhand right that had put 14 professionals on the canvas before her, 200 pounds of intent traveling in a tight arc toward her jaw. Janet's head moved 4 inches to the left. The punch cut through empty air and kept going, pulling him half a step off balance. She didn't counter. She reset, hands still low, and studied him recover his footing like she was grading him on it. Near the cage door, Pete Alvarez gripped the chain link with both hands. "Mitchell," he said. So quiet, only the man beside him caught it. "That's Janet Mitchell." The man beside him frowned. "Who?" Alvarez didn't answer. He was already pushing forward through the crowd, eyes locked on the cage, trying to get close enough to be sure. By the second minute, Logan had thrown 11 combinations and landed exactly none of them clean. He came forward again, jab cross hook, a sequence ESPN had broken down in slow motion 100 times. Janet slipped the jab, rolled under the cross, and when the hook arrived, she simply wasn't where it expected her to be. 1 step right, smooth as a door swinging open on oiled hinges, letting his own momentum carry him past her into empty space. The gasp that went through the crowd wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was the sound of 30 people quietly recalculating everything they thought they understood about the person standing in front of them. Pete Alvarez let go of the chain link and turned to the man beside him. "That's not a boxer's footwork," he said. "That's Detroit footwork. I've only seen one fighter move like that." Nobody answered him. Nobody was listening yet. They were watching Janet's feet, barely leaving the canvas, weight shifting, like something poured rather than stepped. Every motion trimmed down to the smallest version of itself that could still get the job done. At 2 minutes 20, she threw her first punch. A single jab, short, tight, done before most of the room registered her arm had moved. It landed square on Logan's forehead, not hard enough to hurt, hard enough to announce something. "I can touch you whenever I want." Logan blinked and took a step back that his body chose before his brain approved it. For a man with 26 professional wins, it was the first time in longer than he could remember that his legs had made a decision without asking him first. The bell rang before he could answer it. He walked to his corner breathing harder than the 2 minutes should have earned him. His coach leaned in, said something low and urgent. His eyes stayed on Janet the whole time, like he was trying to solve something with a stare. Janet stood in her own corner, hands at her sides, chest moving in the slow rhythm of someone who hadn't broken a sweat. Reyes watched from outside the cage with his arms crossed and something unreadable behind his eyes. Not surprise, recognition. The look of a man watching a name resurface that he'd assumed was buried for good. 8 years earlier, in a gym on the east side of Detroit that smelled permanently of chalk and old leather, a 17-year-old girl named Aaliyah Mitchell stood in the corner of a boxing ring. watching her older sister work the heavy bag until her knuckles bled through the wraps. Janet Mitchell had gone 34 amateur bouts without a loss by the time she was 23. Scouts from 3 Olympic programs had her name on shortlists. Reporters used words like phenom and once in a generation, and for a while it looked like the whole family's future had narrowed down to 1 ring and 1 weight class and one very simple plan. Aaliyah worshipped her, followed her to the gym every day after school, mimicked her stance in front of the bathroom mirror, begged for gloves of her own until their mother finally gave in. Janet trained her. Slowly, carefully, the jab first, then the guard, then how to move her feet without crossing them. She taught her everything, except the one lesson that mattered most, how to say no to a fight you weren't ready for. Because Aaliyah didn't ask permission, the night a promoter offered her an unsanctioned bout against a fighter 4 years older and 20 pounds heavier. She just showed up, laced her own gloves, and stepped into a ring with no doctor on standby and no one in her corner who could stop what was about to happen. Janet found out an hour after it started, when a friend called screaming that Aaliyah was on the ground and not getting up. She got a head kick clean on the temple in the 3rd minute. No stagger, no warning. Straight down, the sound of it loud enough that the room went from noise to silence in half a breath. Aaliyah spent 11 days in a hospital bed before the machines stopped keeping score. Janet sat beside her the entire time, holding the same hand she used to hold crossing streets when they were kids, watching a fight she couldn't step into no matter how badly her body wanted to. She never fought again. Not 1 round, not 1 exhibition, not 1 charity bout for a cause she used to care about. She packed 1 bag, left Detroit before sunrise, and spent the next several years doing whatever work asked the fewest questions. Warehouse shifts, overnight security, anything that didn't require her hands. She ended up in Las Vegas because it was the one city that didn't remind her of anything. When Pacific Arena posted an opening for janitorial staff, she took it, not for the paycheck, but because some part of her needed to stay close to the thing that had taken her sister, close enough to hear gloves popping against heavy bags, never close enough to put her own gloves back on, until a champion with a camera crew decided otherwise. The bell for round 2 cut through the gym, and Janet rose from her corner store without being called. Logan met her in the center, more careful now, hands higher, chin tucked. The showmanship had drained out of his face. What replaced it was something tighter, more focused. A man who had just realized the cameras weren't the only thing in the room he needed to worry about. He threw a probing jab. Janet slipped it and answered with a short right hand to the body. Precise, aimed just below the ribs. Logan grunted. Not loud. Alvarez's hands tightened on the chain link again. She's not swinging at him, he said, mostly to himself. She's picking spots. Logan shot for a takedown, driving low, wrapping both arms around her hips. Janet sprawled hard, hips down, weight crushing forward, and drove him back to his feet before he'd finished the attempt. Stop letting me up, he hissed through his mouthguard. Janet said nothing. He came again, wilder this time, and threw a spinning elbow that had ended 3 separate opponents' nights over the course of his career. Janet took 1 step back. The elbow sailed past her shoulder, with room to spare. And as his own momentum carried him forward off balance, she drove a short hook into his ribs, quiet, dark, and precise, landing with a sound that made 2 people near the cage door visibly flinch. Logan's knee buckled. He didn't fall, but it touched canvas for half a second before he caught himself, and every phone in the building captured it. The champion who had never been dropped in 26 professional fights had just taken a knee from a woman half the room had ignored an hour earlier. His coach threw a white towel over the top rope. Logan snatched it off the mat and hurled it back over the cage wall before it landed. "Don't you dare," he said, and stood back up, swaying, mouthguard barely hanging on, blood starting to color the inside of his lip. Janet told the story, Jackie Cover and Bobby Marham, was reached out. There was no satisfaction on her face. If anything, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with her legs. Reyes pressed himself against the cage from outside. Janet, she looked at him for 1 second. Something passed between them, not a plan, but a confirmation, like a question, finally being answered out loud. The bell rang for round 3, and Logan came off his stool, already committed to something that wasn't strategy anymore. Logan threw everything he had left in the opening 10 seconds. It wasn't a game plan anymore, and it was pride, wounded and loud, dragging a body forward that every signal underneath it was begging to stop. His combinations were still fast, but they'd gone wide and sloppy, elbows drifting from his ribs, feet flattening instead of staying light on the balls. Janet had been watching those cracks form since the opening bell, patient in a way that made the room around her feel colder. He loaded a right hand, full weight behind it, humiliation compressed into one punch, thrown with a sound closer to a shout than an exhale. Janet slipped it clean. Then something in her changed. No transition, no build-up. One moment she was the woman with the mop, silent and unreadable. The next, she was something else entirely. The girl who'd gone 34 rounds unbeaten in Detroit before the world took the ring away from her. Her first real combination landed before Logan could reset his guard. A jab that snapped his head back on its hinge, the cross that found the gap between his gloves, an uppercut that lifted him onto his toes, and a left hook to the body that folded him at the waist, like paper creased down the middle. 4 punches, inside 2 seconds, each one placed with the precision of someone who had spent a decade doing nothing else. The gym didn't cheer. It made a sound closer to shock, the kind a crowd makes when it realizes it's watching something it wasn't supposed to see. Logan staggered back into the ropes. His gloves came up late, guards sloppy, legs still under him but answering commands that arrived half a beat behind where they needed to. Janet closed the distance, unhurried, the way a person walks toward a door they already know is unlocked. He swung wide, a last desperate hook aimed at ending it before it could go further. Janet rolled under it and answered with a short right hand to the ribs, the same spot she'd found twice already, the bruise underneath his skin long past being able to absorb a third visit. Logan's knees buckled. He caught the top rope with one glove, held himself up for a second that stretched longer than it should have, breath leaving him in a single ragged exhale. The referee, a grey-haired official who'd stepped into the cage the moment the sparring session stopped looking like sparring, moved in close, hand raised, watching Logan's eyes. Logan waved him off, shook his head, pushed away from the ropes. "I'm good," he said, though the words came out thick around his mouthguard. "I'm good." Janet didn't move in to finish it. She backed off half a step, hands still up, and waited for him to find his feet properly, the way someone waits for a door to fully open before walking through it. Pete Alvarez had made it to the front row by then, hands wrapped around the chain link so tight his knuckles have gone white. "That's Janet Mitchell," he said, to no one in particular. "I watched her fight in Detroit." A few heads turned. Nobody understood the name yet. They would. Logan came off the ropes and threw a jab to buy himself room. Janet slipped it, and this time she didn't wait. A straight right hand landed clean on his chin, snapping his head back, and his legs went before the rest of him caught up to what had happened. He hit the canvas on his back, one arm splayed out, blinking up at the lights. The gym went silent in the space of a single held breath. The referee took one look at Logan's eyes and waved it off before the count reached 1. Somewhere behind the cage, a phone camera caught the exact moment his hand cut through the air, calling it done. Janet stood over him for a second, not gloating, not smiling, just watching him blink up at the ceiling like he was trying to remember what year it was. Then she stepped back, walked to her corner without being told, and let the referee do his job. Reyes was through the cage door before Logan had fully registered what happened, kneeling beside him, checking his eyes, waving off the panic that had started rippling through his entourage. Logan sat up slowly, spat his mouthguard into his glove, and stared at the canvas like it had personally betrayed him. The gym erupted, Not applause exactly, something rawer, phones thrust into the air, voices layering over each other in a wall of noise that the bantamweight's live stream could not keep pace with. The comment counter on his phone was climbing faster than the screen could refresh. Janet unlaced her own gloves, standing in the corner, hands steady, breathing even, like the last 90 seconds hadn't happened at all. Logan got to his feet with Reyes's help, swaying slightly, blood coloring the inside of his lip. He looked across the cage at her, and whatever was left of the performance in his face had burned off completely. "I just got knocked down," he said, voice rough, by the janitor. Nobody laughed this time. Pete Alvarez pushed through the crowd gathering at the cage door, breathing like he'd run there. "Detroit," he said, loud enough now that heads turned toward him instead of the ring. "I cut for a gym on the east side back then. I watched her fight every one of those bouts." Reyes climbed through the cage door, and for a man who'd built his reputation on staying composed in front of cameras, his voice came out rougher than anyone expected. 34-0, he said. Undefeated. Disappeared 8 years ago, and nobody ever knew why. He looked around at the fighters pressed against the cage, at the phones still recording, at Logan standing in the center of the ring, with blood on his lip and a championship belt that suddenly felt like it weighed more than it had that morning. Logan looked at Janet. His voice, when it finally came, had none of the performance left in it. "I need a rematch," he said. "Not for the cameras. For me." Janet pulled her gloves off, set them on the top rope, and looked at him for a long moment before she answered. "Ask me tomorrow," she said, "if you still mean it." She turned and walked toward the cage door, and nobody in that gym, not Reyes, not Alvarez, not even Janet herself, understood yet how far the footage already spreading across a dozen phones was about to travel before the sun went down. The gym emptied slowly. Fighters drifted out in twos and threes, talking low, replaying what they'd just watched. A few glanced at the mock still leaning against the back wall and looked away fast, like it made them uncomfortable now. Janet pulled her hoodie back on and walked out through the rear exit before anyone could stop her. She sat down on the concrete steps behind the building. The parking lot was empty. The desert sun sat low over the strip, turning the sky the color of a fresh bruise. She pulled a photograph from her back pocket, creased at the corners, soft from years of handling. Aaliyah at 17, wearing Janet's old gym hoodie 3 sizes too big, gloves up, grinning at whoever held the camera. The door behind her opened. Reyes sat down without asking, and for a full minute neither of them said anything. "How long did you know?" Janet asked. "Couple months in." Reyes folded his hands between his knees. "The way you moved around the gym. The way you caught that barbell without thinking about it." He paused. "Then I saw the scar." Janet ran her thumb over the edge of the photo. "Her name was Aaliyah. I know now. I taught her everything. How to jab without dropping her elbow. How to move her feet." Her voice caught, just slightly. The first crack in 8 years of careful control. "I never taught her when to say no to a fight." Reyes didn't reach for her. He didn't offer a line meant to fix it. He just let the words sit in the space between them until they'd settled. "I stopped fighting that night," Janet said. "Figured if I stayed close enough to watch and never touched gloves again, I could keep it from happening to anyone else." "You can mop the same floor for 8 years, Reyes said. "Doesn't mean the debt gets paid." A phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, then showed her the screen. A message from a sports network asking for a callback number. 2 more from promoters he didn't recognize. "Footage is already off the phones it started on," he said. "It's not staying local." Janet didn't react. She looked at the mop through the open door behind them, still leaning exactly where she'd left it. "They're already giving you a nickname," Reyes said. "The comeback." "I know who I am," she said. "That's not the part I'm stuck on." The next morning, Logan posted a video with no filter, no music, no crew standing behind the camera. Just him, sitting in his car, in the arena parking lot, a bruise darkening under his eye. "Yesterday I called a woman a janitor, like it was an insult," he said. "She beat me because she used to be one of the best fighters this sport ever produced. and I never once asked her name." He paused, swallowed. "Her name is Janet Mitchell. She's better than I am. Starting next week, she's my coach." The clip spread past the gym, past Vegas, picked up by outlets that had never heard her name until that morning. Within a week, people who'd never set foot in a boxing gym knew who Janet Mitchell was. 6 months later, Janet walked through the front doors of Pacific Arena at 5 in the morning. Same building, same hour, no mop in her hands. Reyes had started talking about retirement not long after the footage broke. Nothing sudden, just a man in his 60s admitting out loud what he'd been circling for years. He gave Janet the title of lead boxing coach first, watched her build a curriculum, watched fighters request her by name over trainers who'd been there a decade. A small plate now sat beside the entrance. Janet Mitchell, lead boxing coach. Logan was already inside, first one in every morning now, working the bag under her direction instead of a camera crew. His record climbed to 29-1. The stumble in his footwork that Janet caught in round 2 was gone within a month. Down the hall, a converted storage room now held 16 sets of gloves, lined up against the wall, donated, sized for kids. The sign above the door read, "The Aaliyah Mitchell Youth Program, free to any teenager in the city who wanted to learn." On a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week her sister had died, Janet stood in front of her first class. 14 kids, ages 12 to 16, different neighborhoods, same nervous energy in their shoulders. A girl in the front row raised her hand. "Coach Mitchell, were you really a janitor?" Janet glanced toward the corner, where the old mop still stood against the wall. She'd asked Reyes to leave it there. "I was a lot of things," she said. "A fighter, a sister, a janitor." She let that sit a second. "The floor taught me something the ring never did." "What's that?" "No matter how many people walk past you like you're invisible, you get to decide what you do next." The class didn't clap. They picked up their gloves and got to work, the way kids do when a lesson actually lands. Outside, the Las Vegas sun climbed over the mountains and spilled through the windows. And if you stood still long enough near that back corner, you could still hear it. The soft, steady sound of a mop hitting the floor at 4:47 in the morning. A rhythm that never fully disappeared. What Janet lost, she never got back. What she found instead was a reason strong enough to carry the weight of it. That's the part worth remembering. Not the knockdown, not the headlines, not the views. The lesson underneath all of it, the people the world overlooks, are usually carrying the most. And the ones who survive it rarely do so by seeking revenge. They do it by making sure nobody else has to survive the same thing alone. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments what part hit hardest. And if you know someone who needs to hear it today, send it their way. If stories like Janet's remind you that the quietest people in the room are often carrying the heaviest weight, hit subscribe, because there's another one waiting for you next week, and it might hit even harder than this one.